He sat alone in his room, the dim light of his phone screen casting a pale glow on his face as he scrolled through their old conversations. There was a time when her replies came fast, playful, full of curiosity and warmth. Now, the last message he'd sent sat there, untouched treat, but unanswered. Hours had turned into days, and still nothing. No response, no explanation, just silence. He told himself maybe she was busy, maybe something came up, maybe she'd reply tomorrow, but the longer he waited, the more he felt the truth settling in like a stone in his chest. She had seen it. She simply didn't care enough to answer. That silence wasn't confusion. It was clarity, a quiet declaration that she was done without ever saying it out loud. And yet he couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop replaying what he'd said, how he'd said it, wondering if he'd come on too strong or too soft, or maybe not said enough. He was stuck in a cycle of overthinking and self-doubt, trying to decode meaning in every word she hadn't said. But the truth needed no decoding. It was simple. If someone wants to be in your life, they don't make you guess. They don't ignore you. They don't vanish. They show up. She didn't. He knew it, but he hadn't accepted it. Not yet. He was still hoping for a different ending, for one more message that could fix what had unraveled. But deep down, he was beginning to realize that this wasn't about her anymore. This was about him, about the pain of giving his heart to someone who didn't hold it with care. And the first step toward healing wasn't another message. It was silences. Silence. A silence that said, "I deserve better than to be ignored." He stared at his phone again, thumb hovering over the screen, debating whether to type anything that might reignite the dying connection. The temptation was strong. A joke, a just checking in. He'd convinced himself that maybe she needed a little reminder. Maybe she'd forgotten how good their conversations once were. Maybe she was waiting for him to make a move. But every time he reached out, all he received was indifference. If she replied at all, it was cold and distant, like a stranger barely tolerating small talk. And yet he kept trying, sending message after message into a silence that grew heavier. With each attempt, somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew what he was doing. He was trying to fix something that only she could repair, and clearly, she had no interest in doing so. Still, he clung to hope, blinded by it, even when it was hurting him. He told himself it was about closure, about getting answers. But the truth was, he was afraid to face the answer he already had. She didn't want him anymore. That hurt more than any ghosted message ever could. Each new text wasn't bridging the gap between them. It was widening it. He was handing over his dignity piece by piece, hoping for scraps of attention. Oh, she knew it. She knew he was still there, still trying, still available. That's why she didn't have to respond. There was no urgency, no fear of losing him. He was already lost in her orbit, chasing something that no longer existed. That realization began to simmer inside him, slow but steady. If he wanted to get his power back, he had to stop giving it away. No more messages, no more hoping. The only way forward now was to let go completely. He had always believed that consistency showed love, that if he just kept showing up, kept reminding her of how much he cared, eventually she would see his worth. He thought that maybe she had forgotten how it felt to laugh with him, to talk for hours, to share the small, quiet moments that used to mean everything. So he kept reaching out, trying to reignite a spark that had clearly burned out. But each unanswered message, each indifferent response, chipped away at that illusion. What he thought was love had turned into a one-sided pursuit, him chasing, her retreating. She didn't need to block him or say goodbye. Her silence said it all. Still, he lingered, trapped in a cycle of self-betrayal disguised as hope. Every time he sent a message, he was really asking, "Do I still matter too?" "You." And every time she ignored it, she answered, "No." He just didn't want to hear it. He feared the finality of walking away more than the humiliation of being ignored. But the truth was, every message made him smaller in her eyes, predictable, uninteresting, too easy. She didn't wonder about him because he never gave her a chance to. He was always there, ready, available. And there's nothing less attractive than someone who's too available for someone who treats them like an option. So he started doing the one thing he hadn't tried yet, disappearing. He stopped replying, stopped viewing her stories, stopped feeding the idea that she still had his heart in her hands. At first it felt wrong, like giving up, but slowly it began to feel like freedom. He wasn't punishing her with silence. He was healing himself with it. It was no longer about her noticing his absence. It was about him finally choosing himself. The days without her replies no longer felt like punishment. They began to feel like peace. The space she once occupied in his mind started to clear, and in its place, he found himself, not the version of him that waited around, second-guessed every word, and overanalyzed each silence, but the version that had dreams, ambitions, and confidence long before she ever entered the picture. For too long, he had poured his energy into someone who never matched it. Now, he began to reclaim that energy, piece by piece. He hit the gym more consistently, not for revenge or to post about it, but because it made him feel strong again. He picked up old hobbies he'd abandoned when he'd made her his priority. He called friends he hadn't talked to in weeks, realizing how many people actually genuinely cared about him. The contrast was jarring. Where he once obsessed over her replies, now he hardly noticed the silence. Where he once checked her social media hoping for signs, now he couldn't remember the last time he looked. Something inside him had shifted. It wasn't that he suddenly stopped caring overnight, but he stopped caring in the same way. He didn't want validation anymore, wanted growth. And with every day that passed, he was becoming a man who didn't chase, but attracted. Because of games or manipulation, but because he radiated purpose. That was what he had been missing all along. He had tried so hard to win her over that he lost sight of the real win, becoming someone he could be proud of. Her silence had once been a void. It was a mirror reflecting the lesson he needed to learn, and he was finally ready to walk forward, not to escape her, but to step into who he was always meant to be. The moment he stopped chasing her was the moment everything became clear. He no longer felt the urge to explain himself, to seek closure, or to wonder if she was thinking about him. The silence that once tore him apart now gave him strength. It reminded him that sometimes the loudest answers come from what's never said. He began to understand that real peace doesn't come from being chosen by someone else. It comes from choosing yourself. She had been a chapter, not the whole story. A chapter filled with lessons, pain, longing, and growth. And now he was turning the page, not in anger, but in acceptance. He didn't need her to reach out anymore, didn't need a message to validate his worth. He had already found what he was searching for in the most unexpected place within. Every morning felt lighter. Every thought of her no longer stung, but served as a quiet reminder of how far he'd come. He no longer needed to prove anything. Not to her, not to anyone. The man who once waited for a reply had become someone who didn't wait for anything except his own goals, his own path, his own peace. And ironically, that's when the phone buzzed. Her name flashed across the screen. A simple message, maybe even innocent. But he just stared at it for a moment, expression calm. He didn't feel excitement. He didn't feel resentment. He felt nothing. Because she no longer had a hold on him. He didn't need to reply. He didn't need to open that door again. He had already walked through another one, a better one. The real win wasn't in getting her back. It was in getting himself back. And now that he wasn't going to lose himself ever again.